Usually when I look at a huge mod, it's an expansion. It'll add new characters, new areas, crops, things like that. On the other hand, MARGO, which is the mod we'll look at today, is a rework mod, or as it calls it, a gameplay overhaul. Almost every system in the game has been tweaked, rebalanced, or even completely reworked, and you're able to pick and choose which parts of the mod you want to implement. We're going to go over each of those modules now, starting with the largest one, professions. Not only does it change almost every single profession in the game, but it adds a prestige system. Once you hit level 10, you can go to the sewers, and the statue that normally lets you repick your professions will now instead send you back to level 1 in that stat, but you get to keep the professions you chose before. You also have the choice of upgrading the profession you already have to make it even better. As for the profession changes, almost all of them have been reworked. The goal was to make the different branches at least a little bit closer to being balanced, as well as just changing some of the boring professions that allow you to sell something for more money. For example, while the artisan profession was really good, it wasn't really interesting. What artisan does now is it makes artisan machines work 10% faster. They'll also now take into account the quality of the crop or whatever you're putting into it. So if you put an iridium quality starfruit into a keg, there's a chance you could get a silver, gold, or even iridium quality wine right off the bat. While I could talk about every single profession change, I want to highlight one from every skill. For foraging, Tracker has been changed to Scavenger. It still tracks forgeable items around the map, but it now also adds a treasure hunt minigame. When entering a map, there's a chance to trigger a treasure hunt. A purple arrow will point towards where the treasure is, and you need to find it before the time limit ends. You'll get a reward if you do, and the longer your streak of not failing the minigame is, the better the rewards will be. In mining, the gemologist profession has been reworked to bring back qualities of minerals, which kind of existed back in version 1.0. As you mine more of a certain kind of mineral, the chance you'll get a higher quality increases. And on top of that, crystallariums will work 25% faster. As you could probably guess for fishing, the entire trapper side of the skill has been reworked to be much more useful. The lure master profession has been changed to add a new effect depending on the bait that you put in the crab pot. Regular bait allows you to catch regular fish that can be found in that water. Wild bait does the same while bringing over the chance to double the fish. Magnets will, instead of fish, attract resources such as artifacts, rings, and weapons. And magic bait allows you to catch any non-legendary fish, any location, any season, and all fish caught will be iridium quality. The combat professions are interesting because combat outside of the professions module has been changed a lot. Regardless, Acrobat has been completely reworked into the Slimed Piper profession, which will basically allow you to control slimes so that they work for you in dungeons. And if a slime is slain, you have a chance to get a buff. It also makes the slime hutch more useful because if you have slimes in your slime hutch, you have a higher chance of encountering slimes in dungeons. The next module we'll talk about is combat. It's relatively small compared to professions. So you know how some weapons have extra weight? Most of the time, it's not that useful. This module adds knockback damage, where if an enemy is knocked into a wall, it'll take extra damage. The defense stat has also been changed so that instead of 1 defense point reducing 1 point of damage, it now instead reduces it by a percentage. This change also applies to enemies like the helmet heads, making them a lot more sturdy, although your critical hits will penetrate that defense. So you know how you can get status conditions, like slimed or burned? Now you can apply status conditions to enemies, including bleeding, burning, chilled, frozen, poisoned, slowed, and stunned. And finally, if some of these changes make the game feel too easy or too hard for you, they added difficulty sliders in the settings. Our next module is another chunky one. Weapons. While it may sound similar to the previous module, this is all about how you obtain and use weapons. First of all, swords and clubs now have a sort of combo attack. If you hold the attack button, you'll automatically perform the combo. Swords specifically have an extra change to their special attack. Now there's 2 types of swords, defensive and offensive. Defensive swords retain the special attack that they have in the vanilla game, while offensive swords have a stab special attack, which makes you invincible and stab forward. The weapons themselves have also been rebalanced. There's a few more tiers of weapons, Mythic, Masterwork, and Legendary, that are a bit more special. These will all have unique ways of being obtained, such as from quests, finding a blueprint and having it crafted by Clint, or the same Galaxy Sword quest we all know and love with a bit of extra difficulty. Slingshots also have their own module. Normally, slingshots are almost always used just for mining with explosive ammo, almost never used as a weapon. This module aims to change that. Slingshots can now get critical hits. They now have a special move, which is a melee attack so that you don't have to change weapons, and can be upgraded at the forge like any other weapon. And the Galaxy Slingshot, which is cut content, has been re-added to the game and is now upgradable into the Infinity Slingshot, just like the other Galaxy weapons. Another smaller combat module involving rings was added. The system the vanilla game has for rings is already pretty diverse and useful, but there's still a couple blemishes. For instance, the Topaz ring does literally nothing, so it's been changed to add defense instead. And the Jade ring, instead of increasing your critical damage by 10%, which is the same amount that the Ruby ring increases all damage, so what's the point? Now increases it by 50%. In addition to that, all of the basic gemstone rings are now craftable, using their gemstone and a couple of bars. One new ring has been added. The Garnet ring decreases the cooldown of your special attacks, since, as I previously mentioned, the Acrobat profession, which previously did this, has been removed. There are 5 other rings that have gotten reworks. The Warrior ring, which previously had a very low chance to give you a very small attack buff every time you defeat a monster, now always gives you a small attack buff after defeating every enemy that will slowly decay if you exit combat. The Ring of Yoba, which just doesn't hold up to other defensive rings, now has a cooldown instead of a low % chance to activate, and instead of just making you invincible, gives you a shield depending on how much damage you took. The Savage ring, which was actually too powerful in the vanilla game, now has the speed buff you gain after slaying a monster slowly decay. The Immunity ring, which only gave you a small boost to immunity, now gives you 100% immunity, so you'll never get a debuff. And the Ring of Thorns can now inflict the Bleed debuff, which was added in the combat module. We're now moving on to the second half of the modules, starting with the Tools module. The first and most basic change, the axe and the pickaxe, now have the area of effect upgrade that the hoe and the watering can have, in addition to their regular upgrade effects. Both scythes have been buffed. The regular scythe now has twice the reach of a sword, so that you don't just use a sword instead, and the golden scythe has twice the range of the regular scythe. Every tool can now get the Master and Swift enchantments, and one final upgrade has been added to every tool with radioactive bars. Clint doesn't want to mess around with any of that, so you do it at the forge instead. The Enchantments module changes the enchantment specifically for weapons. Just like the Jade ring changes, the Jade enchantment has been buffed from 10% crit power to 50% crit power, and the Garnet has been added for enchantments, and just like the Garnet ring, it reduces the cooldown of your special attacks by 10%. Now for the Prismatic Shard enchantment changes. Like many other parts of the game, there's almost always a best choice, so the goal with these were to balance things out a bit. Artful, instead of just reducing your cooldown timer, gives a different buff to each type of special attack. Offensive swords can now dash twice. Defensive swords after blocking have a guaranteed critical hit afterwards. The dagger special attack gets an extra hit and is a guaranteed bleed, and the special attack for clubs gets increased range and stuns all enemies for 2 seconds. Blasting absorbs damage you take and releases that power with the next special attack. Bloodthirsty, like the vanilla vampiric enchantment, absorbs defeated enemies as health, and if you're at full HP, adds it to a shield. Bug Killer has been changed to Carving. In addition to the original effect, it pierces 1 defense of every enemy, and it'll immediately deshell a rock crab on hit. Cleaving adds area of effect damage to enemies around the target that you hit. Energized is completely new, and it kind of reminds me of the Plasma ability from Kirby. As you move around, you'll accumulate energy. Once that energy is full, your next attack will cause an electric discharge. The Mammonite's enchantment immediately destroys an enemy if they reach 10% HP, and that threshold increases by 1% for each enemy you destroy until you take damage. Steadfast removes your ability to get critical hits, but it multiplies your critical hit chance by your critical hit power and adds that onto your base damage. And Wabbajack just causes unpredictable effects. That's it for all of the modules affecting combat. Now we're moving on to fish ponds. The fish you put inside will no longer lose their quality. Fish ponds can now produce multiple items in one day. Fish ponds with radioactive or mutant fish species will now transform any ores or bars you put into them into radioactive ores and bars after a couple of days. And if you have the aquarist profession, you can now put legendary fish into your fish pond. The next module, this one's going to be controversial, taxes. Basically, now you gotta pay tax. The Ferngill Republic is at war, so why wouldn't they want your juicy tax dollars? It surprisingly works a lot like tax does in real life. There's different tax brackets, and once you enter these brackets, that income in that bracket is taxed at that amount. You owe this tax on the first day of the month, and if you don't have enough money to cover it, the money will be deducted from your shipping bin profits until you pay it off. Luckily, any business expenses you make, such as buying seeds or upgrading your farmhouse, are 100% tax deductible. The last module is simply called Tweex, and it tweaks small parts of the game. I won't go over every single tweak, but some of the effects are: crops will now die if you don't water them. If a bomb is hit by an explosion, it'll instantly explode itself. And fruit trees will no longer grow in winter unless they're fertilized like every other tree. That comes to the end of our discussion of the modules. Now you may be wondering, is that it? No, there are several in-depth mechanics that I just did not discuss here because it's a lot. If you'd like to see every single change that this mod makes, I'd recommend going to check out the Nexus Mods page. And while it may seem like a lot, again, I have to stress that you can turn off any little part of it that you want. Don't like that your crops would die if you don't water them? Turn it off. Don't like that you turn towards the direction of your cursor when using a tool? Turn it off. I did. I will say, I've never had to make a script for a mod showcase before, but this just had so much to it, there's no way I could just remember to show everything off. Hopefully I've introduced to you one of your new favorite mods. Thank you all for watching, and good night.